The new KTM 390 Adventure is probably one of the most exciting launches from this year, and by now, if you've already seen our first ride review, you know that we really enjoyed this bike in Goa in that setting. But now it's time for the more interesting, more detailed real-world review, as well as the comparison with that. The Royal Enfield Himalayan 450, the direct rival to this motorcycle. In fact, the Himalayan 450 has existed in a class of its own until now. So for today, I've got Gavin with me. Gavin is the sort of rider who loves going out on the weekend, riding off-road. These kind of bikes are right up his street. He's been riding them a lot, testing them, and we've got so much to say that we decided to just have a conversation today and talk about what we think. So Gavin, where do we start? Engines?
Engines, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. What do you think?
I definitely think this engine feels a bit more engaging.
Okay.
That to me, as relaxed and nice as it is, you do have to work it a bit more, in my opinion. Right. But overall, I just think it comes down to personal preference, maybe what kind of riding style you have.
Yeah.
I prefer this one. Okay. Slightly. I'm not that I have an issue with it. Yeah. It's just, if I really had to pick one, I'd pick this one.
I understand what you're saying, and I think the reason behind that is because the Himalayan, the bigger engine, just has better response. 3,000 to 6,000 RPM, it's more effortless and there's more shove, so it feels more reactive in the city, whereas this engine is rather muted at low revs, which is nice when you just want to chill and ride calmly, but it comes alive at 7,000 RPM, 7,000 RPM particularly, so the KTM is faster. We know that, we've tested it. This is the first adventure bike in this category that has a sub 6-second time 0 to 100. The Himalayan was quick, but this is noticeably quicker. But I understand what you mean, and I've spoken to a few people in the office who've taken the bike for a ride who say it doesn't have that KTM aggression and excitement. And to some people that may be disappointing, but I think it's a good factor to have a bike that's just chill to ride. One of the reasons I love commuting on the Himalayan is that I can ride quickly but calmly. And when you're doing that on a daily basis, I have a 1-hour commute, one way to work. I think that really helps. And the KTM can do that as well. That was something I really wanted to see. Can it commute in the same way as the Himalayan? And I think it does. Engine, gearbox, I think the Himalayan gearbox shifts better.
Yeah,
it's a crisp feel. It shifts more smoothly. This one has a quick shifter, which is a nice thing to have. It's an up and down quick shifter. It's a little hard sometimes. It doesn't work very well sometimes, but I'd say it's better to have it than not have it.
True.
It's not a game changer, but it's a nice thing to have.
Nice thing to have.
It's not that any particular engine screams at me, but I think on the highway, this one does a much better job. Yeah. The Himalayan starts to feel like it's working hard above 110. And then you run into vibrations, and that's a whole different topic. We're going to get into that. So out on the highway, I feel like I want to be on this motorcycle. 120 is absolutely effortless. The wind protection from this windscreen is superb on the highway. You're sitting at a very calm, in a very calm state of mind. You're not feeling the wind blast, which you do on that bike to a larger degree. The downside to the wind protection is in the city. Yeah. This bike gets hot. Too hot. And I don't mean heat coming off the engine. In fact, the Himalayan seems to throw off a little more heat from the engine. But you're just sitting in this still air, and it's summer right now. We're at 37 degrees in the afternoons. And the KTM is not giving you refreshing air. If I owned this, I would look in the aftermarket for something much smaller than this as a windscreen. Maybe even take the whole windscreen off. I don't know. Try and figure something out. But I definitely prefer being on the Himalayan in the city. What do you think?
I think that windscreen is really nice on the highway. However, it does cocoon you and mask the kind of speed that you're doing. Yeah. You know, the sense of speed is a lot higher on the Himalayan. But long tours, long journeys, I think I'd prefer that overall. Not that you can't get a taller screen on this one. Sure. You know, but the fact that they've created a nice screen with a nice little inlet for wind to pass through, I think overall that just makes it a bit better.
I've actually been thinking about it for the past few days. I think this is probably the best touring bike in the country at the moment, Indian bike. Yeah. Because the 650s from Royal Enfield have a wonderful engine for high sustained speeds, but none of them have a very comfortable riding position along with very comfortable suspension, along with good wind protection. Yeah. This bike has that. You've got cruise control, which you said works surprisingly well.
Yeah, works surprisingly well actually. It just takes a bit getting used to that rocker switch over there, but once you get used to it, it's
and
I
easy. Kept hitting the button for the cruise control instead of the horn. You need to reprogram your mind. The good news is when you hit this button, it's not doing anything. So you're not mistakenly activating anything. You're just not getting the horn, but that is something to learn in the city. Yeah. So highway riding, definitely the KTM over the Himalayan. Yeah. In the city, there are give and takes. I think one of the big advantages of this bike is its size. Everyone who sits on it is amazed by how compact it feels and how easy it feels. It's 14 kilos lighter than the Himalayan, but I would have believed it if you told me it's 20 kilos lighter than the Himalayan.
Yeah.
It really feels that way the moment you lift it off the stand. In fact, one of the big things is lifting it off the stand. The Himalayan with a full tank of gas, you really feel it. So that is very nice. The clutch is lighter than the Himalayan in traffic. Also very nice. It doesn't have the same steering lock as the Himalayan. Yesterday, you and I were riding together. And
we were zipping through traffic,
I was able to make it through one of these gaps in traffic that Gavin was just stuck because there's not enough lock on this motorcycle. So that's one aspect where the Himalayan is better. For me, the biggest irritation in traffic is the vibrations.
Yeah.
I think let's get to that now.
Yeah.
There are harsh vibrations in the foot pegs. Now, KTM has put these really chunky, fat foot peg rubbers on this motorcycle, but it's still not done enough. Now, to be fair, this motorcycle is due for a service. It's done a little over 1200 kilometers, and KTMs generally feel a little fresher and smoother after a service, but I don't think there's going to be a drastic change in character there. The foot peg vibrations in city is something that will be on your mind, and if this is something that annoys you, you really need to try it out and see how you feel about it. Vibrations on the Himalayan go to the other end of the spectrum. Nice. It's good in the foot pegs. Yeah. It comes on in the handlebar, but not at city speeds.
Not at city speeds. Just when you're at highway, when you're cruising at higher speeds, you tend to feel it. I did a road trip from Goa to Bombay. And say about 2 hours into it, my hands got numb, my palms got numb. I had to stop just so I could rest my palms.
Right.
Which is something I've never really done on a motorcycle before, but new experience. However, no issues with the foot pegs whatsoever.
Exactly. It's that 100 to 120 zone where the vibrations are really felt, and after a while, like you said, you really feel it. And that's where both these motorcycles have a disappointing compromise with the vibrations. They do it very differently. Yeah. One is irritating the city, one is irritating on the highway, but it's something you have to be aware of, and it's something you have to pick your poison, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, Gavin, what do you think of the braking on both these motorcycles? You just did the performance test, the braking on this bike. Now both of them have axial front brake calipers. On the KTM, that almost could be perceived as a step down because they always do these very nice radial brake calipers. But to be honest, I really like the brakes on this. I've talked about it in our first ride review as well. Dull initial bite, builds really well. The rear brake, I think, has been judged really well. You can tell that rear brake has been tuned by riders who appreciate this kind of control off-road because it doesn't come in hard. You can really modulate, and you were mentioning that you like turning the ABS off and riding the city, and I do the same thing. It's the system is off, you have that sense of control. Himalayan brakes, they give me the sense that they're working against a lot of weight. Yeah. The rear is very strong. It's a 270 mm rotor, I think, which is really big for a rear brake, and it works very well on the road, but it's really sensitive off-road. Yeah. What do you think?
I think I prefer that one mainly because, like you said, there's less weight to work with. Feels a bit easier. You can dial in the brakes a bit better. The progression is a bit more predictable. Yeah. So that makes it a bit easier. Especially when I was doing my braking tests, just out of curiosity, I turned the rear ABS off and I got much better feedback. And in fact, we got much better braking figures too with the rear ABS off. So that was surprising to me. And I think for a lot of riders that are maybe going to be new off-road also, that the level of sensitivity for the rear brake makes it a lot easier. Doesn't intimidate them nearly as much to lock the rear wheel. So overall, I think I prefer that one.
Okay. Himalayan braking is good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
The performance numbers that we got, the braking numbers were also really very
actually
good.
Surprisingly close. They're not that far apart.
They're not very different, but it's in terms of sensation that you sort of need to put a little more effort. You know you're carrying this inertia and you need to slow it down. So in general, I just sort of prefer this. Yeah. Suspension.
I really like the Himalayan. Out of the box, you don't touch it, don't adjust it. It just feels near perfect actually. You know, it absorbs bumps in the cities flawlessly. Out on the highway, it does a decent job too. Maybe I can fault it a bit off-road, but I think that's more to do with the weight than the suspension. Yeah. But all in all, I have no issues with it. And I think I prefer the suspension setup on this over that one.
I don't think I know. I knew it in Goa. Because again, I'm really familiar with this bike. It's my long-termer. Yeah. It's fabulous. What Royal Enfield and Showa have collectively achieved with this suspension is the gold standard in the Indian motorcycle market, and the KTM does not come close. Mumbai is a real test of motorcycle suspension. Bouncy, harshly made roads that you're hitting at high speeds. So the suspension really has to work. And I think the main reason I like the Himalayan so much is because it isolates me from that. It lets me get home in a better mood than I would have on a bike having been bounced around for an hour. The KTM cannot match the Himalayan in terms of suspension, not just comfort in the way it absorbs the road, but also the way it behaves off-road. Yeah. Gentle, low-speed riding, it's really very good. It soaks in nicely. But the moment you start asking more of the bike, it bottoms out. Yeah, in our tests, in our shoot in Goa, first few jumps, thwack, straight to the suspension. Wow, I did not expect that from what is supposed to be the more hardcore 390 adventure. So, you know, you end up adding in compression and eventually you max out the compression, what that does is it stops the bike from bottoming out. It helps, but it also makes the suspension feel a little harsher.
Yeah.
And if you try doing that on the road, you will get firmer suspension, but more harsh feedback coming off the road. So yeah, you can tune it, you can find a slightly better setup, but you can't fix it.
You can't fix it,
yeah,
true.
That is
especially with jumps, that's something you really notice. Whenever I would jump both bikes, and
Yeah.
I haven't done a lot of jumps on that, but each time I did notice it bottom out. I did feel like, oh shit, am I going to hit the bottom?
Yeah.
This one, it's just the weight. If it wasn't for the weight, every landing is really smooth. A random mid-corner, if you hit a bump, it absorbs it much better.
Yeah.
So overall, you just feel like you can depend and be a bit more carefree with the suspension over here.
Weight and size are the two big deals with these motorcycles. Like if you sit on this bike, everyone who sits on this motorcycle is amazed at just how easy it is to pick off the stand. It feels slimmer than the Himalayan. In fact, it feels a whole size smaller, and the good thing here is that this doesn't feel like a small bike because of this. When you look forward, you see this large windscreen, you see this nice TFT out there, it's sitting high up, and that gives you the impression that you're on a big premium motorcycle. That is a very good thing. With the Himalayan, the impression is completely different. You sit on it, you feel that massive fuel tank between you, and you feel like you're on a big motorcycle. So both of them do it, but they do it in a different way. There is a difference that I noticed in the sense of solid feeling from the motorcycle and quality. Quality wise, I really like the switchgear. I think much better than the Himalayan.
We've had a few issues.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But there's a lot of plastic on this motorcycle. There are panels all over, overlapping each other, and we are already hearing different sorts of buzzing sounds coming at different RPMs. So I suspect that this is a motorcycle that you're going to have to learn to get used to listening to these buzzy plastics.
Yeah.
The Himalayan just doesn't have anything. It's a non-fed motorcycle. It's got a large fuel tank, and that's about it. Yeah. I think style-wise, we were talking about this. This looks more like an adventure bike.
Yeah.
You've got that, the panels on the side, the big windscreen. What are your thoughts on the styling?
I think I prefer the Himalayan. Again, from a styling perspective, it looks unique. More color options also. I don't like the colors on this, what you have right now. It's just a variation of orange and white. I don't like that, and I think the way the color spread is also, it kind of breaks it apart differently. So overall, I prefer this. Looking at it from different angles also, it has a more unique light signature too. Small things like that. When I see it from far away, I know that's a Himalayan or maybe a Guerrilla, but I know it's either one of them. With this one, it's a tiny little tail lamp, and I don't know, maybe it's a personal preference, but I just like the design on this slightly better.
I like the overall what Royal Enfield has created, but I prefer the authentic identity of this. This looks like it's inspired by a Dakar racer bike, right? Looks like an adventure bike. I agree with you on the color patterns to some extent. I like the orange and white. I love bright colors. That's not a problem. But I don't like what they've done with this fuel tank. This black fuel tank, it's a matte black. It sort of doesn't really work with the rest of it. I wish there was something more interesting going on here. And my brother owns a 390 Adventure previous gen, and this material doesn't really do very well in the long term. It starts to look a little faded. If fuel drips on it, doesn't do so well. So I would like something a little different here. But style-wise, I mean, it's a personal thing. You decide what you like more. But this definitely looks more purposeful. It looks like an adventure bike.
Yeah. I like the rugged aesthetic of this that it has overall, just small difference, but I don't know why. I guess I just gravitate a little bit more towards this.
What about displays? I think that's a clear win.
I think I really like that one. It's overall, I mean, not that this is bad. It's very clear.
It's a great
quite
display.
legible, However, when you start toggling through it is when you notice.
That's the problem. The switchgear is the problem, not the display.
And sometimes the display also feels a little laggy. It's not nearly as quick as that one. And when you go through it, the colors, the clarity, even the thing that you mentioned in your first ride, the languages, right?
Yeah,
the little
it's
display.
A little fun feature.
It makes you feel like you've bought something a lot more premium, right? And I think overall the functionality, the display, the crispness, I think I prefer that one.
I have to give Royal Enfield credit for going through the effort of making a round TFT. This kind of stuff is very easily available in the components industry. You can get a rectangular TFT very easily. That's hard to do. They went through the effort of creating it. They went through the effort of trying to incorporate Google Maps into it. Now, this has navigation, but you've got to use the KTM MyRide app for that. That one, you can use your phone, but you have to keep your phone screen on, which drains battery. You've got to keep your phone plugged in. It keeps the phone hot. Again, there's give and take between the two. I like the idea of having navigation because, you're traveling, you come to a new city, you don't know how to get to your hotel. Turn it on at that point. Right? I don't like mounting my very expensive phone on the handlebar. Not a good idea. So the fact that these two bikes can give you that is a good thing. But definitely in terms of the look of the display, the way you control the display, the way you interact with it, I think this is miles ahead of the Himalayan.
Yeah, true that.
So that's the displays. What do we think of the headlamps and the mirrors?
So I prefer the headlamp and the mirror setup on that one. Headlamp, again, it has much better throw. Maybe doesn't have the kind of intensity I would have expected, but still the throw itself is pretty good. Far better than this one.
Yeah, definitely.
The mirrors too, they don't vibrate nearly as much. You have a clear view. The shape of it also makes it a bit easier. Maybe because of the shape of this, you might avoid some glare when you're riding at night. However, I feel like that's a small compromise. I would much rather prefer the clear visibility that I can have on the highway. And overall, I prefer that one.
Yeah, similar story. I remember I've not ridden. The problem with Mumbai, everything's lit up, so it's hard to judge a headlight very well. But it has a very good throw, and you can see this clear outline of LED light on the car in front of you, and that's nice. I feel like it's not illuminating the road right in front of me as well as I'd like you mentioned. And you put the high beam on and it just illuminates further ahead.
A bit too further ahead. But you can adjust it from below.
But definitely a better headlight than that. Mirrors, similar story for me as well. I love the way those mirrors, cut down the glare of high beams behind you. But those mirrors have driven me mad over the last year because they keep coming loose constantly. They need to be tightened. And I think if I own that bike, I just Loctite those mirrors into place. It's an annoyance of how often you have to keep tightening it. There's no issue with this so far. It's a very different system, just one bolt that goes down. The stalks are from the Dominar, but the shape of the mirror is different, and it also does a great job of showing you what's behind you, and no vibration issues as well, because again, the bar is not vibrating like the Himalayan. So when you're seated in this motorcycle, I think the general view in front of you is really good. I also realized we didn't talk that much about the seating positions on these bikes. So the seat height on this is actually a little taller than that. That's 825, this is 830, but that's adjustable. You can raise it by another 20 mm if you want. Then you can buy the accessory seats from Royal Enfield, which also add a little more height. In fact, that bike is on the accessory seats. Superb seat. I love it. It's one of the, I think the only accessory on my bike, and it's really just improved the experience for me. This motorcycle, the seat feels slimmer, and again, with the nature of the bike feeling slimmer and feeling much less top heavy, the seat height feels better. I think shorter riders, even though they may be on their tiptoes, they find this a lot easier to manage than the Himalayan. But I don't love the seat comfort. It's okay for short durations. I felt it get a little sore and painful after an hour. What did you think?
Yeah, I felt the same thing. I mean, I took it for a small spin to Lonavala and back, and on my way back, my butt was sore already. Whereas this one, I've done the entire journey from Goa to Bombay with this touring seat and didn't feel a thing. The only issue I had that day was my palms with the vibrations, but nothing else. That one, I don't think there's an accessory seat even available for that. And the stock seat, as it is, it's nice when you're riding hard, gives you decent feedback. You at least know what's happening under you. But when you're touring, not so much.
Not so much. Otherwise, the riding position is quite nice. The bar on its own does not feel wide or narrow, but when you compare it to the Himalayan, it feels a little narrow. I don't have a problem with it. I generally don't like these sort of handguards because they come in the way in traffic, but this bar is not so wide, so it's okay. Nice neutral riding position. Seat to foot peg ratio is a little tighter than the Himalayan. I don't think it's uncomfortable, and if you take those rubber dampers off, then you get another almost inch of space between the seat and the foot peg. But let's see what the Himalayan riding position looks like.
Personally, I prefer the Himalayan riding position because to me it feels a lot more relaxed overall. It's just easier, the bars reach you, you're sitting upright. And yeah, it's a bit wider, which takes a bit getting used to in traffic. But once you're used to it, it's not intimidating at all.
I think the riding position of that bike goes with the identity of the bike. It is a bigger, heavier, chunkier motorcycle, and the riding position feels it. You also said you prefer the off-road ergonomics on the Himalayan?
Yes, I did. So when I'm standing up, the bars reach me a lot more easier. With that one, I feel like I'm maybe a bit too forward. I'm bending a bit too forward. And especially for taller riders, I think they might prefer risers on those.
I think people will.
You didn't seem to have that issue on your...
I didn't have the issue in terms of connection with the motorcycle while I was riding off-road. I mean, it's really much better than the old C90 Adventure. There's a lot to grip with the motorcycle with your legs itself. There is a lean forward, but I mean, it's okay for a hard riding. If you just want to chill and stand and, while touring and stretch, a bar riser would help. But I would also want to go for a higher seat for someone tall to just sort of open up the space. But these are small fixes that can be done, just go to a seat maker and just have your seat modified. So I think they're both comfortable. Slight differences, not a world of difference in my opinion, but they're both nice all day long sort of riding.
But if you had to pick one, which one would you pick?
I don't really have too much of a preference between the two. This just feels too hot to me in traffic.
Okay.
In the city, when I'm commuting, I'm just feeling really still and hot behind it. That is slightly more comfortable. Yeah. Right, so that's the way you sit on the motorcycle. How do these bikes feel on the road? We've gone up and down some mountain roads, we've done some highway riding. What's the opinion there?
So out on the highway, even though this has a bit of weight, I enjoy it. You don't really feel the weight once you get moving nearly as much. However, once you start riding really aggressively, that's the only time you feel it, and only when you ride it back to back with that one. So overall, riding out on the highway, going around corners, just touring, I think I prefer that one in terms of how light, easy, it feels a lot faster. When I want to ride aggressively, I can push myself around corners a bit more on that one. Not to say that this isn't fun. To me, this feels just as good. It's more of a 19-20 difference than a night and day difference sort of thing.
I found that the Himalayan reminds me of a big adventure bike. It feels like this big thing, and it handles well for how big it is. But it's not super light and agile and just a breeze to corner. You got to put some inputs into the motorcycle. You got to, you got to be in charge of things.
You're going to muscle it. I think that's part of the fun.
I wouldn't go so far as muscle, because it is a easy steering motorcycle at speed. But this, the weight difference comes through again. I mean, it's just, whether it's slow speeds in narrow lanes or high speed touring, it's just far less effort and it feels more sporty.
Yeah,
I think so.
More sporty,
it does. Tires on both motorcycles, the Himalayan tires are really very good. They're also expensive. They're, I think, over 10,000 rupees a set. Those are Seat tires. KTM has chosen to go with Apollo Tramplers for India. Honestly, I have no complaints with these tires in terms of performance. I think they handle nicely on the road. There's enough grip. In terrain like this, they were fine as well. The one complaint is that they're noisy. Did you notice that?
Yeah, yes I did.
So here's the thing now, when we were riding in Goa, I said that these tires make sound from 40 to 50 kph. But having come to Mumbai, what I've realized is I was wearing an MX helmet, open helmet, very noisy. And above 50, the wind noise was sort of drowning out the tire noise. Here in the city, I've realized that there is just tire noise. These are noisy tires and they make this droning sound 70, 80 kilometers per hour, at which point then the wind again starts to overwhelm it. But if you're someone who rides without earplugs, you're going to hear that tire sound all the time. You'll just have to learn to get used to it.
Okay, while we're on the subject of road handling, I thought it'd be a good point to touch upon highway touring, and what it's like. So this motorcycle, slightly bigger tank, right? Not
quite
bigger,
a
bigger tank actually.
17 and 14 and a half.
Yeah, 14 and a half. And this, I've noticed that you have a lot better mounting points for your luggage.
Definitely.
Like when I took it on a road trip, I could easily mount a tail bag all the way back over here and still liberate enough room for a pillion over here.
That rack on the back alone gives you so many more options for mounting soft luggage or even a hard case. You can buy one from Royal Enfield, you can buy one from the aftermarket. The foot pegs themselves, the mount points here are better. I'm not so happy with the design of this in terms of mounting luggage. This is a place where a bag loop can fall off. You've got a loop out here, but you don't have a loop out here. It's also really narrow at the back. I'm not sure if you can even mount a top box on this. I don't know if it'll be possible. We'll see if someone can come up with something in the aftermarket. Maybe some rack that, comes around here.
Speaking of aftermarket, by the way, you've got a lot more options with Royal Enfield over here for accessories aftermarket.
Way more. In the aftermarket and from Royal Enfield themselves, these guys will sell you 3 accessories. There's a center stand, which comes as standard on the Himalayan. There is a headlamp protector. And what's the third one?
The third one was a fender extender for the
fender
front.
extender from the front, right? I forgot about that. But the Himalayan has
way
more accessories, and it's a part of the buying experience. But we'll get back to that in a bit. Before that, I think we should also talk about pillion comfort. Not super spacious on the KTM, not bad, but from an adventure standpoint, it could have been a slightly better seat, and it's also quite firm. Himalayan again takes it.
My mum actually had the opportunity to sit on both these motorcycles, and she preferred the Himalayan too. She didn't like the climb on either one of them, but she preferred the Himalayan overall.
Okay, so mum's word is final. The Himalayan is better for pillion touring, but maybe something mum doesn't want to come with you with is off-road. We did talk about it a little bit in terms of how the suspension handles things, but in general, if you're someone who's looking at buying an adventure touring bike, you dream about exploring places and going somewhere different and trying something a little that would be scary to you. What's your opinion on both these bikes?
I think they both can be really fun off-road. This one is a little more intimidating, mainly because of the weight. That one, because it's lighter, so if your front wheel ends up hitting a rock, you can correct it a lot quicker, a lot easier. It feels nicer. If you drop it, to pick it up, it's a lot easier. This one, to lift it off the stand itself is effort in itself, So overall, I think that becomes a bit friendlier, nicer off-road. In fact, I like the throttle response on that too, a bit off-road. It allowed me to fine-tune it a bit better. Even though I like the feel of the throttle here, I like the connection I have off-road and how precise I can be with it.
It's gentle and predictable.
Predictable, exactly. So overall, I would say that's better. This one requires slightly more skill to get the most out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, this is easier. This is more friendly. And again, you and I are quite tall, so this is something that doesn't really strike us. But I've talked to some content creators who are at the ride, who at the launch ride of this, who said that they really struggle with the Himalayan off-road because you're dealing with this weight up there that's moving around. And on terrain like this, it's uneven, it's hard to get a footing, it's hard to find confidence. Everything becomes easier with the KTM and it just becomes more forgiving.
Yeah.
I think when you start riding hard, the KTM disappoints with its suspension, whereas the Himalayan does not. But the Himalayan definitely demands more confidence and I would say more skill.
More skill.
If you have those two aspects with you, you will go just as far on the Himalayan as you would on the 390, but it takes a little more from the rider.
Yeah, true that.
Yeah, okay. I think we've sort of summed up the riding experience in these motorcycles. Now let's talk about the buying experience. What do you get for your money? How much you're going to have to pay? Definitely the more feature-rich motorcycle. We've touched on cruise control, quick shifter. So those are the two main features that the KTM shines over the Himalayan. There's also one aspect that this bike comes with spoked wheels that support tubeless tires as standard, whereas you have to buy them as an accessory on the Royal Enfield, although they're superbly affordable, unbelievably affordable, just a little over 10,000 rupees. There's a difference in how the two companies have done it. Royal Enfield is traditional cross-spoke wheels, whereas here it's a standard spoke with a sort of rubber seal in the center. It's KTM's patented design. I mean, this is just a feeling. It's a rubber component. There has to be some sort of life associated with it. We haven't got an answer yet on that. But I think that is just maybe a better solution for casual riders. But the fact that you're getting tubeless on this motorcycle is still wonderful. However, you are paying a lot more money. This is 3.67 lakhs ex-showroom and that's about 2.9 to 3.05 or so, depending on color. The only difference is color. But when you look at on-road prices, the differences gets really big. This becomes 4.43 lakh on-road and that includes a very affordably priced 3-year extended warranty, I think. It's something like 1,500 rupees. So KTM is giving you a long warranty to give you peace of mind. But the Himalayan, if you spec it base version with the optional spoke wheels for tubeless tires, it's still 3.53 lakhs on-road. And even if you go for the top color, you're adding about 10,000 rupees. So the difference in the price between these two is 90,000, 80,000, and that's a big difference. So what do you make of that? Especially you had something to say about brand image as well.
Yeah, I do. I mean, KTM's charging premium money, but are they still perceived as a premium brand at this point? They've got their big bikes in, but is the public perception still there?
I wouldn't say them being perceived as a premium brand is a problem, but KTM has work to do with improving the overall perception of its motorcycles in India, whereas Royal Enfield is, I mean, we know it's a loved brand. People want to be a part of it. The Himalayan sells far more than the 390 ever has in terms of adventure bikes, at least. And there's also the ownership engagement.
True, the ownership engagement. I feel like with the Royal Enfield, you head into the showroom. You've got everything from apparel. You've got events. They've got so many things. I mean, there's so much to do as an owner of an Himalayan, right?
And a sense of belonging.
Yeah, a sense of belonging. There's a community and a large sense of community. You can even attend a concert that happens once every year down in Goa, whereas KTM in that sense...
They're doing stuff.
Let's
give them credit. They're doing a lot of interesting rides. They're doing local events. They're getting people out, training them on these bikes. I will give KTM the credit, but they have to keep pushing on that regard. There's a long way to go.
As an ex-KTM owner, I'm just amazed that it's been well over a decade now and they still haven't been able to bring in power parts or have their own standard accessories and gears, which they have available abroad.
They're missing out compared to Royal Enfield in that regard. I'm struggling to justify this much of a price increase over the Himalayan, and there's two reasons for that. One is the vibration, which does compromise the experience in the city. For me, it's something that's always on my mind, and the other is the suspension that is just a little bit of a disappointment from me from what I would expect to be a sort of hardcore off-road capable motorcycle. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, but on the other hand, the weight, size and top heaviness of that bike is a deal breaker to many people.
Yeah.
I personally love it. I love the big bike size of that. I love the feeling of being on a large, comprehensive motorcycle. And that's one of my favorite things about the Himalayan. But it's not the case for everyone. And for people who could not get on the Himalayan for whatever reason in terms of being comfortable on the bike, this solves that. This is the only other option out there that is off-road capable, on-road capable, great at touring, and more accessible. So I do see there being a reason for people to come for this motorcycle. But in most cases, I think the 390X makes fabulous sense because the 390X is priced on par with the Himalayan.
Yeah.
It has a smaller front wheel. It will be a better road bike in that regard. We don't know what the suspension setup is going to be. It's non-adjustable suspension. That's the only question for me. It's missing a few features like cruise control and riding modes, which I don't think make us a difference. You disagree with me?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of people that are climbing up the segment and they want like a full package, right? They want something that feels premium, feels sizable, has features that they've never experienced before, something that makes it fun for them every day.
Yeah.
So I think in that regard, that does attract a few buyers.
Right.
With the with cruise control and whatnot, there are a few buyers who want that TFT, who want that styling, who want to feel like I've bought the top of the line motorcycle. Whereas I think the people that don't really care would probably just go for the X or maybe just stick with the Himalayan.
So I think it's fair to say that this is the better adventure bike because it's lighter, it's easier, it's faster, it's better equipped, and it's more encouraging on-road or off-road. It's more welcoming to a wider skill set. Whereas that is better value for money.
Better value for money.
Yeah.
True. I mean, this can do 95% of what that can do. It's just the extra 5%, and you really have to ask yourself, do you want to pay that extra money?
Sure. And you also have to ask yourself, what do you want to do with this bike? I mean, I would love to think that I'm going to go bashing the trails on the weekend and touring the country once in 6 months. I don't end up doing that. I'm commuting. And I love commuting on the Himalayan. So be a little honest with yourself. What are you looking for? And that should give you the answer between these two modes.